close our eyes for a moment and think of a time when we were in a large group, yet we felt alone. And we felt alone because we were not amongst the people we felt familiar with. Maybe they spoke a different language, or came from a different part of the world, or maybe had a different sexuality. We all have experienced this at one point of our times in our lives. This is how exactly minorities often feel. Hello and welcome. I am Vishwajit Deshmukh and I'm going to be talking to you about history of minorities in India, how minorities have traversed their way in this country, and more importantly, why do they matter? When India was divided into Pakistan and India, Pakistan was a Muslim majority country, whereas India was a Hindu majoritarian country. However, there were countless minorities who did not know which side of the border did they belong to, such as Parsis, Jews, Anglo-Indians, and Buddhists. They found themselves in such a unique position whether to stay in their own country or move to another. However, in the language of remembrance, these minorities have often lost their voice. To take the story of Victoria Jones as told by John Masters in the novel Bhuani Junction, Victoria had just served in the World War II for the British Army. She served as a nurse and came back home. Victoria Jones was an Anglo-Indian woman. Her father was a British railwayman and her mother was an Indian woman. She was mixed race. And just a couple of days before the partition, she found herself in such a unique predicament whether to stay in India or to go to England. She felt, was she Indian enough for the Indians itself, and whether was she white enough for the British? Victoria's dilemma was not alone. An entire community of mixed race Anglo Indians resonated with the same feeling she had during partition. During partition, large scale of violence took place on both sides of the border, especially with respect to the trains that were coming from India to Pakistan and Pakistan to India. These trains were driven by Anglo-Indian railwaymen. Since they did not belong to the debate on either side, they were immune from the violence of the partition. However, their aim was very clear: to bring all passengers to their destination safely and not stop the trains in order to increase that violence. Just like Anglo Indians, other minorities such as Parsis, Jews, and Christians came to this country centuries ago and called this country their home. They have retained their unique identity with respect to their religion and have also created new traditions which are exclusive to the subcontinent of India. By preserving their culture, they are also showing how India has been inclusive in terms of creating new practices and incorporating new ideas for the longest time in the history. While we talk about minorities, it is absolutely essential that we understand who these minorities are. Before we start claiming whose land this is, it is absolutely essential we understand the law. The Constitution, however, does not define what minorities are. However, it gives them particular rights and rights exclusive to these minorities. So, how does the Constitution interpret minorities in the first place when it does not provide for a definition? Constitution looks at particularly the caste identities, gender identity, linguistic, and furthermore, even religious identities to define who minorities essentially are. But in this day and age, are these compartments enough to provide development that we seek? These compartments would have provided solutions and made people's lives better. However, we need to look further to a concept called intersectionality. Intersectionality, as a concept provided by Kimberly Crenshaw, is an idea that we do not exist alone with just one identity, and our identities overlap with one another. To give an example of this, the experiences of a Muslim man would not be similar to that of a disabled Muslim woman. The disabled Muslim woman brings along with her three unique identities of being a minority. Firstly, being disabled, secondly, being a Muslim, and thirdly, being a woman. And all of these three things impact her identity at a major level. It is also essential to understand that minorities are not static in any way. When a Hindu man travels from New Delhi to Mizoram, he becomes a minority there because Mizoram has a majority of Christians. So that is when we stop and reflect how we treat minorities in this country. In December 2019, the Indian Parliament took away the nominated seats meant for Anglo-Indians. And the reasons they provided was that there are only 296 Anglo-Indians left in this country, and most of the Anglo-Indians have assimilated into the Indian culture. The number was certainly false and also has been refuted by the All India Anglo-Indian Association. However, the funny predicament of assimilation is something that we need to ponder upon. Do minorities have to assimilate in order to be accepted in this country? Is a very essential question we ask ourselves in this day and age. Being different isn't bad. Being different is rather unique because it brings an aspect of diversity into the conversation, which essentially would have been very homogeneous. To understand somebody and bring about their points is as much as better as creating a society which is inclusive of all people who live in it. So while we talk about this, we need to understand what can we do in order to bring minorities together to make them feel much more safer. We firstly start by understanding them. Where do they come from and what their thought processes are. Only when we understand these three things, we can be inclusive towards them so as to develop policies which are better equipped to find solutions for people. The aspect of social, administrative, and economic reforms would certainly follow through parliamentary procedure. However, before we do that, it is absolutely essential that we represent these minorities through their own voice, by understanding them, taking note of their points, bringing them into conversations which directly affect them at this point in time. Colonial historians gave us a history that stated that India was a country which was in constant wars with each other on account of religion, stating that India can never exist as a country that has different religions. This was simply to fortify the colonial policies of divide and rule. However, what colonial historians missed in their conversations was that how minorities have existed in this country while existing in a situation where they were not a majority, or they were inherently very different from the cultures that were a majority part of it. We are now living in a new India which is questioning its own ideas, it's questioning its philosophies, India which is not only tolerant but also ready to accept and change the things that have gone wrong in the past. And it is up to us to broaden these conversations. It is absolutely essential that we let people know that the forces that seek to divide us are not much stronger than the forces that seek to unite us. Thank you.